Oh, I see you there. Today we're going to be talking about the Great Depression and how we're heading that way. But I'm gonna head you over to my friend Anthony to teach you about the subject.
Thank you, Eddie. Many of you probably know what the Great Depression is. The Great Depression was the deepest and longest lasting economic downturn in the history of the Western industrialized world. But what led to the Great Depression, you may ask? The immediate cause of the Great Depression was the stock market crash. The American economy entered the ordinary recession during the summers of 1929. As consumer spending dropped and unsold goods began to pile up, slowing production. At the same time, stock prices continued to rise, and the fall of that year had reached levels that cannot be justified by anticipated future earnings. On October 24, 1929, the stock market bubble finally burst. As investors began dumping shares at shocking amount, a record 12.9 million shares were traded that day, also known as Black Thursday. 5 days later, on Black Tuesday, some 16 million shares were traded after another wave of panic swept Wall Street. Millions of shares ended up worthless, and those investors who had bought stocks on margin, which is borrowed money, were wiped out completely. Throughout the 1930s, over 9,000 banks failed. Bank deposits were uninsured, and thus as banks failed, people simply lost their savings. Surviving banks, unsure of the economic situations, and concerned for their own survival, stopped being as willing to create new loans. This exacerbated the situation, leading to less and less expenditures. So now, Eddie, please tell us more about the current situation we're facing.
If the United States had an economic downturn on the scale of the Great Depression of 1929, your life would change dramatically. 1 out of every 4 people you know would lose their jobs. That's because the unemployment rate would quintuple from the current rate of 5% to 25%. That means GDP, which is gross domestic product, would fall from its current $18 trillion level to $13.5 trillion. Instead of inflation at about 2%, deflation would cause prices to drop 10%. International trade would shrink 65%. That's how bad the Great Depression was. So, could it happen again? In a 2011 CNN poll, nearly 50% of Americans believed it could. They thought it would happen within a year. Fortunately, they were wrong. But many people are still worried about a depression reoccurring. Others are convinced we are nearly already in a depression. They just can't see where the drive for growth will come from. What makes these Americans so worried? First, stock prices fell in early 2016. Investors lost trillions, and some countries even went into recession. That followed losses in 2015, where nearly 70% of all US investors lost money. According to some, it was even the worst year for stocks since 2008. Second, volatility. Oil prices have also been volatile. They rose to $50 a barrel after plummeting to a 13-year low of 26 with 55 cents per barrel in January 2016. That was just 18 months after a high of $100 per barrel in June 2014. Oil prices were pushed down to an increase in supply. The housing collapse. The housing collapse was worse in the recession than the Great Depression. Prices fell 31.8% from their peak of $229,000 in June 2007 to $156,100 in February 2011. They fell 24% during the Depression. In the early stages of recovery, foreclosures made up to 30% of all home sales. Many homeowners were upside down in their mortgages. Unemployment rates are near the 4% natural rate of unemployment, but 5.6 million are working part-time because they can't find a full-time job. Almost 25% of the unemployed have been looking for 6 months or more. Then there's the 426,000 discouraged workers who have given up looking for work and are no longer counted in the unemployment numbers. That has driven the labor force participation rate down to 62.7%. That means not everyone has returned to the job market. Fourth, the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve used up its usual expansionary monetary policy tools to fight the financial crisis. It ended up quantitative easing, but that only means it isn't adding to its bloated balance sheet. It keeps rolling over the $4 trillion in US debt that is purchased for the program. The Fed funds rate is 0.75%. The FOMC will raise it in 2018 and 2017, which is real close from now. Until then, the Fed has less firepower for the next financial crisis. And the fifth one, I'll take it up to my bro, Pony. He'll explain to you. Thank you.
The fifth is the federal government. It is unlikely to come to the rescue with stimulus spending as it did in 2009. The 19 trillion debt means the Tea Party Republicans in Congress have been looking to cut spending instead. The US economy has been living on borrowed money for a long time. The financial crisis scared businesses and families. That's why growth in this recovery is lower than in prior ones. You're witnessing gradual deleveraging, and it will continue for some time. In the United States, Europe, and Japan, it's aggravated by demographics. These countries have aging populations. Seniors don't need to spend as much on housing, cars, and furniture as young people starting a family. But this deleveraging is unlikely to be enough to cause a worldwide depression. That's thanks to growth in China, India, and other emerging market countries that have excess cash reserves and younger populations. Eddie?
What's good for the economy may not necessarily be good for you, and vice versa. When the economy is uncertain, it's time to get defensive. The only way to do that is to increase your income and reduce your spending. That way, you'll have money to reduce your debt. After that, make sure you have a cushion, and then build up your savings. The best investment is still a diversified portfolio. If possible, make sure you have a college degree. Education is a great divide in the society. The unemployment rate for college grads is half the average, although housing is historically cheap as are interest rates. Only buy a house you can only easily afford. The smaller the house, the less furniture you'll have to buy to fill it. The economy will probably avoid another Great Depression, but either way, you'll be in a better position to weather it. Well, thank you for watching.
We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
you.